Okay, let's get into this. We are about to do a deep dive into something incredibly complex and, let's be honest, pretty controversial. We're talking about the contraction of free expression.
It really is. And it's not just one thing, right? It's not just government censorship in the classic sense. It's this cultural chill. It's happening on so many different fronts at once.
That's what's so fascinating about the material you've given us.
Yeah.
It connects dots you wouldn't normally think to connect. You've got Hollywood's internal battles over creative freedom. Then you zoom out to, the global influence of state censors and even the tech we use every day.
It's all intertwined. And we have to start by acknowledging attention here, because it's important for you, the listener, to get this right up front. Freedom of speech has never meant freedom from consequence.
That's not what this is about. You live in a society, people will react to what you say. That's a given. But at the same time, there's just this tremendous value in having a culture that is, well, extremely tolerant of different views.
It's a necessity, really, because think about it. If you only ever listen to ideas you already agree, or if you only permit that offends absolutely no one, you basically build a wall around. You stop learning. You stop growing. You can't challenge your own assumptions.
And that's really the mission here, based on all this reading, to show why things like complexity and context and maybe what you'd call intellectual bravery are just so essential right now. The stakes are way higher than just someone getting their feelings hurt.
They really are. And the key failing, whether it's a social media mob or an actual state censor, it's fundamentally the same. It's a denial of the complexity of human communication.
It's the rush to judgment. It's
Right.
censorship instead of just taking a second to listen to try and understand the intent and then, debate the idea on its merits.
Exactly. So to really unpack this, we have to look at it from a few different angles. First, we'll get into how nuance is just getting steamrolled in cultural debates, and comedy is really the main battleground there. Then we have to look at Hollywood, this big ideological shift, and how that's changing the stories we all consume. And finally, we'll look at the external pressures. We're talking global financial incentive, China specific, and the biases that are just, well, baked into the algorithms of big tech.
And it's so important to connect why this matters to everyone. This isn't just an academic discussion. Why is restricting debate, whether it's from an intolerant mob or a repressive government, why is that a problem for everybody?
Because at the end of the day, it hurts the people who have the least power. And it stops all of us, no matter where we are on the social ladder, from learning. If you can't debate bad ideas, if you just banish them to the shadows, you actually weaken the most important causes. You have to be able to see a bad idea, talk about it, and then defeat it with a better argument. That's the only way forward.
So let's start there. With that cultural war on nuance, it feels like this is the most visible, the most emotionally charged part of the whole problem, right?
It is. And the analysis is so clear on this point. Context is everything. If you don't understand the context in which something is said or done, you can't possibly understand it.
And if you don't get the meat, how can you judge its moral value? You
Yeah.
can't. The words themselves are just the tip of the iceberg. Their meaning is what matters. And that meaning can change so dramatically.
Oh, completely. Think about your tone of voice. I can say, that's a great idea and mean it sincerely. Or I can say, that's a great idea and be dripping with sarcasm. Same words, totally opposite.
Right. Or even the medium it's delivered in. The exact same sentence is going to land very differently if you hear it on cable news versus, say, in a comedy club. You adjust your expectations based on where you are.
We all do it automatically. And this is where it gets really crucial for what's happening today. The context of the speaker themselves, their known beliefs, their values, that changes everything.
This is the Chris Rock point from the material. A joke about race told by Chris Rock or Dave Chappelle is understood completely differently than if the exact same words were said by, a known white supremacist like David Duke.
And it should, because we intuitively understand the difference in intent. We get the subtext. Rock is using satire to expose prejudice. Duke would be using the language of prejudice to confirm it. You can't judge the message without understanding the messenger's whole
But the danger of what we call cancel culture is that it seems to actively reject this. It's built on speed. It's a mob rushing to judgment, demanding censorship without taking that time to listen or understand.
And the ultimate battleground for this, as we said, is comedy. Comedy's power isn't just making you laugh. It's one of the most powerful tools we have for highlighting how ridiculous certain ideas or behavior.
And laughter is a disarming tool, right? It opens the audience up. It helps with what the source material calls suspension of disbelief and narrative transportation. If you can make someone laugh, they become way more receptive to a challenging idea, even for just a moment.
Well, that's the whole trick for a satirist, isn't it? They are trying to communicate an inoffensive idea, often a deeply moral one, but they have to use offensive language or imagery to get there. That's the whole point. And to do that, you need room to experiment, room to take risks, and crucially, room to make mistakes.
Which is why so many big-name comedians have just stopped playing college campus. Chris Rock was talking about this years ago, back in 2014. He said he quit because the students were becoming too conservative. Not politically, he clarified, but socially. This unwillingness to risk offending anyone, ever.
And here's the quote that just nails the chilling effect. He said, "You can't even be offensive on your way to being inoffensive." Think about what that means. If the only path to exposing a terrible idea, like racism, requires you to briefly use racist language to show how absurd it is, and that path is blocked off from the start, then the social commentary just dies. You're left with nothing. Bland, safe, totally inoffensive.
This is the perfect entry point for the Tropic Thunder example. The Tropic Thunder test, as the material calls it, because it is a perfect case study in multi-layered commentary that people today are actively trying to cancel. And in doing so, they miss the entire point.
The entire point. So for anyone who hasn't seen it, the film came out in 2008, directed by Ben Stiller. It's a satire of Hollywood, of war movies, and especially of self-important, pretentious actors.
And the character at the center of the controversy is Kirk Lazarus, played by Robert Downey Jr. He's this decorated Australian method actor who is so committed that he undergoes a controversial pigmentation alteration procedure. He's in blackface to play.
And it's crucial to remember, as the analysis points out, he was nominated for an Oscar for this role, and a Golden Globe and a BAFTA. The industry, the critics, everyone at the time understood what the film was doing.
Because the film isn't promoting racism, it's viciously mocking. The joke is the meta-racism of it all. It's aimed squarely at the unbelievable arrogance of a certain type of actor and at Hollywood's own history of using stereotypes for minority roles. Kirk Lazarus is the butt of the joke. He's the idiot.
And the film gives you all the tools you need to understand that. It's not subtle. The character Al Pacino, who is a black actor played by Brandon T. Jackson, calls him out on it constantly inside the movie.
Right. He literally says something like, they had one good part for a black man and they gave it to Crocodile Dundee. It's an internal critique baked right into the script. The film is calling out its own premise.
It is. And Lazarus eventually apologizes, sort of confusedly, admitting he was being a dumb. Well, you know. The character is morally lost. The film is screaming at the audience about how insane and offensive his method is. To try and cancel Downey Jr. for this today just shows a complete failure to tell the difference between using an idea for satire and
And that leads us to another example of this, right? The intentional use of comedy against a really dangerous ideology. Let's talk about Jojo Rabbit.
a fantastic example, an Oscar-winning film that, on the surface, looks incredibly offensive. I mean, you've got constant Heil Hitler salutes, Nazi symbolism everywhere, and Hitler himself as a little boy's imaginary friend. If you just saw a 10-second clip out of context, you'd be horrified.
But the director, Taika Waititi, is both Jewish and Maori, and the film is a satire. He's using all that imagery to expose the utter ridiculousness of it all, the childishness of Nazi ideology. He's making evil look small and pathetic.
And this philosophy comes straight from people like Mel Brooks, a Jewish World War II veteran. Brooks' whole thing is that you can't beat a demagogue like Hitler in a straight debate. He'll out-talk. But if you can make people laugh at him, if you can turn him into a ridiculous caricature, you win. You strip the ideology of its power, of its mystique.
That's the paradox we have to protect, the freedom to use the language and imagery of our enemies against them, to lampoon them. The culture has to be smart enough to tell the difference between genuine support and satirical destruction. But that's exactly what this new mob justice system seems incapable of doing.
It really is. I mean, what started as activism on college campuses, you know, this idea of safe spaces, has just metastasized. It's grown into these huge online campaigns to deplatform people, dox them, get them fired.
And the list of targets is all over the place. The goalposts are always moving. The research brings up everyone from a random Twitter user like Justine Sacco, who lost her job over one bad joke, to huge figures from all across the political spectrum. Condoleezza Rice, Bill Maher, Kevin Hart.
What's really disturbing, though, is that it's not just aimed at people saying overtly bigoted things. The sources cite so many academics who were targeted for the crime of defending open debate. That's it.
Like the Christakis couple at Yale, who just suggested students should be allowed to pick their own Halloween costume. Or Lindsay Shepard, who got disciplined for showing a debate clip in a class. Or Brett Weinstein. Their crime was defending due process, and for that, they got canceled.
And this whole system is running on a very particular world, one that comes from certain strains of critical theory, which basically argues that truth isn't universal. The idea is that truth is just a tool used by powerful groups to maintain control.
And when you start from that premise, you end up with what the material calls guilt by identity. Your guilt or innocence isn't based on what you did, but on where you sit in this complex hierarchy of oppression.
Which leads to this massive standard. Prejudice from some groups is condemned as race or sex, but prejudice from other groups, ones deemed oppressed, is often just given a pass. When the rules apply differently depending on who you are, well, that's not just more.
And there's no forgiveness.
Yeah.
That's the other key part. It's just this constant demand for public atonement for sins, real or imagined, that never end.
The Carson King story is just heartbreaking and perfectly illustrates this. Here's a guy who raises over $1 million for a children's hospital off a sign at a football. A great story.
A genuinely good thing.
A wonderful thing. But then someone digs up 2 racially insensitive jokes he tweeted when he was 16 years old.
And suddenly, that becomes the entire story. He apologizes proactively, but his corporate partnership gets pulled. The focus shifts entirely from the charity to the sin.
The apology wasn't enough. The good deed didn't matter. The system demands purity, and it never forgives. It's exactly what that open letter in Harper's Magazine warned about. When you restrict debate like this, you ultimately hurt the power, and you make it impossible for a democratic society to function.
You have to preserve the possibility of good faith disagreement, because words, at the end of the day, are the alternative to violence. They're what we use to get to justice.
Right. And that brings us to the creative world. Let's shift from the culture at large to Hollywood specific, because the pressure there has become so internal, and it's leading to some really artistically bankrupt places.
This ideological capture of storytelling. The sources draw a really interesting distinction between 2 types of art.
They do. On the one hand, you have the artist who sees the audience as the customer. They create work to be enjoyed, to be shared. They want to connect. Then you have the other group, the one that sort of views the audience with contempt. They resent the idea that their art has to be commercial, that it has to be liked.
And the really alarming trend is that so much of modern Hollywood seems to have adopted that second mindset, the contemptuous one. They take these beloved properties, these huge franchises, and they seem almost desperate to change them, to inject their own modern politics into them, even if it means alienating the core fans who love the original.
It's a total reversal from how things used to be, even pretty recently. The research quotes Peter Jackson talking about making the Fellowship of the Ring. His whole promise was, we are not going to put any of our own politics or our own messages. Their job was to honor Tolkien.
You just don't hear that kind of reverence.
You really don't. Instead, you get what the material calls the activist man. This was laid out explicitly by people like Jill Soloway, who gave this big speech about their mission to advance Hopple principles and explicitly leftist intersectional feminist agenda throughout the industry.
And the most damaging principle, the one that really stood out, was principles over product. Think about that.
Mm-hmm.
It means the activist goal, the message, is more important than making a good movie or making money. The audience isn't a customer anymore. They're students in a lecture hall.
And the result of that is this pervasive fear that the sources describe at every level of the industry. Netflix, Amazon, the big studios, everyone, even liberal, feels like they have to constantly outwoke everyone just to keep their job.
As one writer put it, the best defense against the woke is to become its most vocal supporter.
It's created this chilling environment, a new kind of McCarthyism, which is just so ironic for an industry that spent decades patting itself on the back for resisting the original one. People are afraid to say what they really think.
And you can see the results on screen. You can see the artistic consequence. It's this rise of what you can only call nihilistic media. We're just drowning in these ultra-dark, bleak stories. Game of Thrones, Breaking Bad, Ozark.
The narrative formula is always the same. Characters are either amoral or just plain. If a character starts out as heroic, they're portrayed as naive, and they either get killed off quickly or they get corrupt. The message is always that good and bad aren't real, and humanity is basically a lost cause.
Now, the defense you always hear from writers is, well, audiences are too sophisticated for simple good guys now. They say good characters are boring.
Right, and the source material pushes back on that so effective. It argues that this isn't an audience problem, it's a writing problem. The idea that good characters are inherently boring is just a lazy excuse from writers who, frankly, aren't skilled enough to write complex, morally upright characters. It's much easier to write a cynical anti.
That feels right. Being a good person is actually harder. It involves sacrifice and restraint and facing temptation. That's the very definition of drama.
Exactly. Think about Luke Skywalker, or Mal Reynolds from Firefly, or even Captain America. These are complex heroes. Their goodness is interesting because it's constantly being tested. Being a good person in a difficult world is a struggle. That's compelling. But to write that, you actually have to have a clear idea of what right and wrong are, which seems to be what's missing.
Okay, so beyond the ideology, there's also the cynical marketing angle to all that. Manufactured outrage.
Oh, absolutely. In a media landscape, this crowded controversy is just a fantastic promotional strategy. It's way cheaper than buying ads. You just bait the outrage machine on social media, get everyone yelling, and suddenly you've got millions of dollars in free publicity, what they call earned media.
The example of the Witches movie on HBO Max is just a perfect clinical case. It was, by most accounts, a pretty mediocre film. Nobody was talking about it.
Nobody. But then it blew up when people from the limb difference community pointed out that the witch's hands look like a real congenital condition called ectrodactyly.
And the cycle began. The outrage, the public apologies from Warner Bros. And Anne Hathaway, the endless article. And for a week, everyone was talking about a forgettable movie. The outrage sold it.
It's a damaging incentive structure. It rewards polarization. It becomes more profitable to start a fight than to create something of quality that might appeal to a wide range of people. The art gets worse, but the marketing department hits.
So now let's zoom out even further. Beyond Hollywood's internal issues to the massive external forces, let's start with Chinese state censorship and its economic power.
This is a huge, maybe even existential threat to free expression globally, just because of the sheer amount of money involved. China is a colossal market, and Chinese companies have poured billions into American studios and theater chains.
It's a classic Faustian bargain. The studios want access to that massive audience, but to get it, they have to submit to the Communist Party's censors.
Those censors have absolute power. They only let in about 38 foreign films a year, so the competition.
And the creative changes they demand are just staggering. It starts right at the script level. In Marvel's Doctor Strange, the character of the Ancient One is Tibetan in the comic. But since China doesn't recognize Tibet's sovereignty, they just changed the character to be Celtic. Problem solved.
Or Iron Man 3. The villain, the Mandarin, is Chinese in the comics. Can't have that. So they changed him into a British actor playing a terrorist. They completely neutered the character to appease the censors.
And sometimes they have to fix it after the fact. The remake of Red Dawn is the craziest example. The villains were originally the Chinese military. After they shot the whole movie, they got scared, and they spent millions in post-production digitally changing all the Chinese flags and uniforms to North Korean ones.
Just swapped one authoritarian regime for another one that was less financial. It's unbelievable. And the censorship isn't even always political. They'll ban movies for having ghosts, like Ghostbusters, or for having time travel, or for having gay cowboys, like Brokeback Mountain.
So the entertainment companies are just consistently choosing market access over defending free expression. And that forces creators everywhere to self-censor from day one, just thinking, will this play in Beijing?
Exactly. Now, switching from an external authoritarian threat to a domestic digital one, we have to talk about big tech. Twitter, Facebook, Google, they have this immense power over communication through their algorithms.
And the problem isn't necessarily malice, right? It's bias. We hear artificial intelligence and we think it's objective, but these systems are all written by humans.
Humans who live and work in a very specific cultural bubble, mostly Silicon Valley, and their own political viewpoints, their own blind spots, they just unavoidably get baked into the code.
The source material had that amazing quote from a former Twitter engineer. He was describing users who get flagged as problematic, and he just casually said they often look like Guns God America users with the flag and the cross in their bio.
He didn't even realize he was revealing his own bias. If that's your mental image of an extremist, you're going to end up writing code that silences millions of ordinary people just because you don't understand their culture.
And the whole system is the opposite of due process. It's guilty until proven innocent. Your account gets suspended. You often don't even know why. And the appeals process is a black box. There's no transparency.
And the most important point the analysis makes is that this aggressive censorship hasn't worked. It hasn't better. After years of this, polarization is worse than ever. Political violence is more common. All it's done is convince millions of people that the system is rigged against them, which just pushes them further into their corners.
So what's the solution? A lot of people immediately jump to government regulation.
And that's a trap. First, we have to be clear on the law. The First Amendment protects you from the government censoring your... It does not apply to private companies. Twitter, they can set their own...
And then there's Section 230. The law everyone wants to repeal, but nobody seems to understand.
Right. All Section 230 says is that a platform like Facebook isn't legally liable for what a user posts on it. If you get rid of that, you don't get more free speech. You get way, way less.
Because the platforms would suddenly be on the hook for every single post. To avoid lawsuits, they'd have to police speech even more aggressively. It would be a disaster for the...
A total disaster. And besides, any attempt at heavy-handed regulation is just going to be co-opted by the big guys anyway. Google and Facebook have more lobbyists than any startup. They'll write the rules to benefit themselves. It's called regulatory capture, and it happens every time. We don't need central planning for the internet.
So this all comes together, right? All these different forms of censorship, cultural, corporate, governmental, they connect to a much bigger philosophical idea.
Yeah.
The societal cost of trying to control everything. The cost of a perfect society.
It's the lie of central planning. It's the promise of Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. The motto is community, identity, stability. The deal is you give up your individuality, your freedom to choose, and in return, you get a life with no pain, no poverty, stress.
The experts will make all the decisions for you.
Exactly. But it's impossible because the one variable you can never control is people. You can't know what millions of individuals value, what they want, what they're capable of creating, unless you let them be free to choose for themselves.
And the analysis provides this shocking real-world example of what happens when you try to run a society this way. It points to the American Indian Reservation as a living example of the failure of top-down authoritarian control.
It's a really powerful and tragic case study. The sources argue that reservations show all the classic signs of a centrally planned socialist economy, a system of government oversight that restricts basic economic liberty and, just like everywhere else it's been tried, has produced poverty and despair.
And the key is land ownership, or the lack thereof. Something like 95% of reservation land is held in trust by the federal government. It's not private property in the way you and I understand it.
And if you don't truly own your land, you can't use it as collateral to get a loan from a bank. That one fact just kills entrepreneurship. It stops people from building homes, starting businesses. It locks them out of the entire free market.
The results are devastating. The poverty rate is over 25%. People have to drive for hours to get to a grocery store or a doctor. Chronic disease is rampant. Basic infrastructure is just missing. The government has essentially run a century-long experiment in collectivism and paternalism, and the result is the chaos and misery that always follow.
And that leads to this psychological devastation. When your autonomy is stripped away, whether it's by a government bureaucrat or a cultural mob, your own goals and values start to feel meaningless, lose your sense of agency.
And we're seeing the mental health crisis from this in real time. The material notes that for the first time in nearly 50 years, more Americans are reporting they're unhappy than happy. Drug overdoses are spiking.
And the number from the CDC is just terrifying. A full quarter of young people, 18 to 24, have seriously considered that is the real-world cost of a society that restricts choice, demands conformity, and limits autonomy. The human spirit just can't take.
So freedom is the root of meaning. It's that simple. We needed to choose our own path, to build relationships, to find purpose.
We do, and we need a shared, objective reality to even have empathy with each other, which is what's being threatened when truth becomes total, based only on ideas.
At the end of the day, words are the opposite of violence. The ability to use words to argue, to debate, even to satirize and offend, that's a victory for civilization.
It absolutely is. So the path forward isn't more control. It's more competition and more individual. Hollywood has created a massive market opportunity by abandoning huge chunks of the audience. Someone is going to step in and make content.
And for you, the listener, your power is in your choice. The cancel mobs only have power because we give them our attention.
So what can you do? First, just don't join the outrage pile. Second, support creators and platforms that value free expression. Vote with your wallet and don't watch stuff you don't like, but don't demand it's.
And most of all, stand up for a culture of free speech, even and especially for ideas you hate. We have to be willing to engage with difficult things because the alternative, these shrinking echo chambers, is so much worse.
To sum it all up, we just have to accept that communication is messy, mistakes will happen, but if we choose the comfort of safe spaces over the hard work of exchanging ideas, we just wall ourselves off from ever understanding anyone else. We have to reject this false choice between justice and freedom. You can't have one without the other.
Thank you for going on this deep dive with us. Final provocative thought to chew on. Building. If we as a society decide that some historical, so that we're not even allowed to their symbols or their language fun of, are we accidentally making those ideas sacred by making them too dangerous? Are we giving them a new kind of forbidden miss? It's something to think. Go out and try to foster tolerance.